Hi everyone, my name is Adam and I'm the Community Programme Manager at the Green Software Foundation. A very warm welcome to you all. I'm so excited because today is not only UN World Environment Day, but we're also celebrating 2 years of Green Software Foundation and the launch of our State of Green Software report. Now, first of all, just before we start, we've just got a few things to run through, which is, first of all, the code of conduct. This is a live event, so please do be aware of others, be welcoming and respectful, understanding of differences, friendly and patient, open to all questions and viewpoints, and above all, be kind and considerate to others. And that applies to everyone in the live chat and, of course, all of our live speakers as well. And just a very brief rundown, we'll be talking today about what green software is. We'll be giving an introduction to our State of Green Software report, which was published last week. You'll meet our panelists who are each going to talk about their favourite insight from the report. And you'll also have the chance to ask your questions and find out how you can get involved with Green Software Foundation. So I would like to welcome our fabulous panelists tonight, and we'll go in the order that you appear on the screen, if that's okay. Starting with Tamara, would you please introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do for Green Software?
Yeah, so I'm Tamara Kneese, and I was the lead researcher and author of the State of Green Software report. And I got involved with Green Software Foundation through my previous job as director of developer engagement on the green software team at Intel, where I worked with Asim. So yeah, really happy to be here.
Welcome, Tamara. Thank you. And next to Anne.
Hi, I'm Anne Currie, and I've been in the tech industry for a very long time, nearly 30 years, and I used to work in very highly efficient software. And these days, I'm interested in how the software industry is going to manage the energy transition, and I am the co-chair of the GSF community group.
Incredible. And Asim?
Hi everyone, my name's Asim. I am the Executive Director and Chairperson of the Green Software Foundation. I'm also Director of Green Software at Intel. I've been looking at sustainability through the lens of software for quite a few years now. And I'm just really happy to be here and to be sharing this report with everybody.
And last but certainly not least, Pindi.
Hello everyone, my name is Pindi Buller and I work at UBS in the ESG technology space. UBS joined Green Software Foundation as one of the steering members over a year ago, where we're working with the foundation to bring all the great work and insights into our internal teams.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Pindi and everyone. And we've already got loads of people commenting in the live chat and across YouTube and LinkedIn, and I know there'll be plenty of people joining us on Twitter as well. So please do keep those questions coming in throughout. We'll try and answer them as they go, and there's also time at the end. But first of all, what's going to happen now is I am going to disappear off into the background, and Asim is going to talk a little bit about what the Green Software Foundation is and what green software is in general. So Asim, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam, for arranging all this and everybody for joining today. So yeah, so welcome to the Green Software Foundation. We're just over 2 years old now. If you want me, I actually posted a video recently to describe kind of what it was like and why the kind of foundation first started. Now, I would say there's a bunch of people asking the same question, which is, can you build software so there are zero harmful environmental effects? And that's really what the foundation is just a number of companies and a number of people all coming together and all trying to answer that one question. I used to say we don't have many answers, but we've got a lot of good questions. We're starting to get some good answers now. So just very briefly, what do we mean when we talk about green software? We're talking about the carbon emissions right now. We're focused on carbon emissions of software. And we say that there's 3 ways of making software greener. That is being more energy efficient, more hardware efficient, using less hardware, and something called carbon awareness, which means doing more when the electricity is green and doing less when the electricity is dirty. We have a theory of change, which involves around this idea that we need to create more knowledge, change the tech culture, so that the green software is made a priority. Have the knowledge, so once you change the culture, people know what to do, and create tooling, so it makes it easier for people to adopt a lot of this technology. We now have almost about 50. Yep, on the website you can see we almost about 50 member companies, about 1,000 registered people taking part in about 4 working groups and projects. Very briefly, there's a lot going on right now, but very briefly, we have a standards working group, and they've been working on a standard called a software carbon intensity standard, which is now going into ISO, which should hopefully reach an ISO certification by the middle of this year. We have a community working group, which Anne chairs or co-chairs, and they do a whole bunch of things, including events like this, but also training. And we've got a wonderful piece of training, which we now have, I think, 40 or 50,000 people have taken. We have the open source working group. They're working on various technologies around the tooling area, so the Carbonaware SDK, the Carbon QL project. And we have the policy working group. And for the last year, they've been focused on a bunch of things, but primarily focused on the State of Green Software report, which started off with just a whole bunch of conversations about a year ago. I want to know more about where the space is, where is the research, what are people talking about in this field, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And I think now I'll introduce Tamara, who's the lead researcher, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the report.
Thank you, Asim. Yeah, so I thought I would talk a little bit about sort of the background of the SOGS report and our process and methodology, just to give you a better idea of sort of the kind of work that went into it. So I think it's really important to note that this was a very collaborative process and that it also took quite a while. So we began planning and preliminary survey design as part of the policy working group back in Q3 of 2022. And when we were coming up with the survey questions for this, we really wanted to understand, first demographic information. So really getting, an idea of the range of domain expertise that developers and other software practitioners had in the space, and sort of where people were coming from geographically, culturally, and in a variety of other ways. We also really wanted to understand in a more comprehensive way the levels of awareness and adoption of green software. So, we were kind of wondering, are people going to know what we're talking about when we say green software, and what do they think that means? And sort of, how are they practicing green software? We also wanted to look at points of friction. So, what are the barriers to adoption? What are the things that are really preventing green software from taking off within various corporate environments? And then also understanding the enablers. So, what are the kind of conditions in terms of tooling or knowledge production or culture, especially the culture of, say, a tech workplace that can really make green software principles part of people's everyday workflows. Because obviously, to make green software successful and scalable, we have to actually meet developers where they are. So the survey was sort of our first attempt to really understand what developers were doing in the space. And we also wanted to leave some room for developer feedback. So while we had 25 questions, and a lot of them are sort of, pretty straightforward, we also did leave room for developers to write in comments and feedback, or frustrations that they had in the field. And for me, that was really the most intriguing part, is really looking at the wisdom and, kind of opinions of developers who were writing in from all over the world. So we got over 2,000 responses in total, and developers from really a range of domains and also a range of companies. So, from small startups to huge corporations and everywhere in between. And then, while a lot of the insights that you'll find are very much driven by the survey data, we also did quite a bit of background research. So looking at, sort of the newest findings from consultancy firms like Gartner and McKinsey, but also really reading through major academic contributions, looking at peer-reviewed journals. And obviously I have a background as a researcher, I have a PhD. This is not, it's part of what I would do anyway, but really understanding kind of that intersection of academic knowledge production and also the potential for tool development and sort of the places where those overlap. And really what we want to do in terms of goals is to really raise the profile of green software and point to the urgency. So the fact that 92% of developers that we surveyed are concerned about climate change. And so what do they need? What kind of support do they need? What kind of resources and tooling do they need to really take action? So the report is for ICT industry leaders who really want to understand why and also how to make green software part of their organization, for developers who want to learn more about the field and get more involved or find community, and academics who might find spaces for additional research. For instance, where are there gaps in the existing literature? And finally, also for policymakers who might be interested in the way that policy and regulation intersects with different market considerations, particularly in a global context. So overall, you'll find 30 insights, which were meant to be kind of easy to pick out so that you can take statistics or other key information from our findings and use them in your own proposals, your own reports internally to really kind of point to the growing field of green software within your own organization. So rather than a kind of traditional PDF, we imagine this is more of an, an interactive website. Although there are, I believe, in total around 13,000 words. So there is a substantial amount of information in there. It's just sort of broken up into, bite-sized morsels. And I think that's all I have to share for now. We can get into more of it through the insights themselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tamara. That was an amazing introduction. And I know that we've had loads of questions already in the chat about various things that we're actually going to touch upon over the next few minutes as each one of us talks about their favourite insight. I can't remember which order we said we were going to do things in now, but everyone has chosen an insight, and I can tell you what the first insight is that we're going to choose, and hopefully someone can put their hand up and say which insight this was. So the first insight we were going to look at in detail was carbon-aware software is central to decarbonisation.
Yes, so I think that was the one that I picked, unless anybody else picked it as well. But I think it's something we talk about a lot, and it's something as developers we're very focused on is can we be more efficient? How can we make our software more efficient? How can we use less power, write in more efficient languages like Rust or whatever, and therefore be greener that way? But a major problem that the tech industry is facing, the whole world is facing, is that we're moving from energy that was very, very dependable. You fire up a gas-fired power station, and electricity is then basically available literally at the flick of a switch. And the new form, the transition is about moving to renewables, and renewables are great, they're cheap, they'll be fantastic, but they will always be subject to the fact that sometimes the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And there are batteries, but batteries are nowhere near as good as just using the power when it's available. There's tons of it sometimes, but if it hangs around too long and it isn't used, it becomes a problem, not a solution. It becomes part of the problem because national grids are not suited to having power flowing around and not being sucked up and used. So we're at a significant advantage in the tech industry. We could choose to time shift when we are drawing power. So I think that's a massively important piece of the puzzle, and it's one that we don't often talk about. We don't talk about enough. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
I might just quickly expand on that with a little plug and a little statement. So the little plug will be we have there's one of the projects, actually our most popular currently open source project is called the Carbonaware SDK. Because then what you're talking about, that whole shifting of compute through time and space, or maybe both, in a very kind of a Doctor Who fashion,
yep.
is one of the things we realized is that a lot of people were doing it, but they're all just writing the same code all the time. And that's one of the first projects the open source working group created was, well, look, if everybody's writing this very low level I've got this workload. When's the best time to run it at? Let's just build that into a kind of a low level API and service, not service, sorry, it's an SDK that anybody could use. So that's like a little plug for the project that we've got there. And Shimon's, yeah, well, there's people on the project on the call. Another just two actually, no, I'll say two quick things about it, because one of the other things I love about Carbonaware SDK, and I think I find this quite a beautiful thought, to be honest with you, which is that if you're a farmer, you wouldn't plow your fields in the middle of the night, right?
No.
You wouldn't you respond to nature. You respond, and like you do things intelligently based off of, like, you don't put your clothes out to dry when it's raining. Like you don't get upset. You just put it out when it's sunny, so that you respond to nature. And I find it, as technologists, we are oftentimes very abstracted away from the physical world. And one interesting aspect of Carbonaware computing is, like, if you are making your software do more when the sun's shining and the wind's blowing and the more resources are being available, you're flexing to kind of the natural order of the world, just like everybody else is forced to. We just happen to be in this weird situation where we didn't have to, but in most other aspects of our life, you do it normally. So I find that Carbonaware computing is actually kind of a normal situation to be in. You do less when you have fewer resources of things. And I find that that's an interesting. I like that idea. I don't know if it's a useful idea, but just it's a nice thought I like to have.
I like the question that somebody's posted there, saying that it's interesting if it leads to time shifting rather than just degrading. Because actually, it's a good point that we probably need to be as efficient as possible all the time, and also time shift. Because the difference between, I mean, I've got solar panels. I don't. The difference between, if it's sunny, there's like limitless power, and if it's not, there's none. So it's kind of it's a good reminder that we really, really need to change what we're doing. But things like AI, does it really matter when we do it? Well, does it matter if it waits until the sun's shining, if we're training models?
Yeah.
And the one thing I like about this insight is that it builds on organizations that have been running follow the sun models for their support cycles. So it's really ingraining just another deeper layer of following the renewable cycle, for example. So shifting your code in your applications. And the point about degrading the service, I think that's key, right? The more people do it, I think we'll get more stats and more data to be able to do comparable studies.
Yeah, cool. It's like eco modes.
Eco, yeah.
That's what I'd call. Well, actually, I was chatting to one of the major. I don't know if I have to keep this secret. I was chatting to one of the major browser development teams, and they would talk. I mentioned eco mode, and they said, actually, we've been talking about it. We'll call it performance mode rather than eco mode. One of those interesting little. It will just, because you will be more performant, which is like an interesting. Who doesn't want to be more performant anyway?
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I forgot UBS was instrumental in creating the Carbonaware SDK. I apologize for not giving the call out to UBS.
No problem. It's great to work with you guys. So we've got another question as well. We're going.
Yeah. Let's take a look at that one. I'm happy for you to read it out, Pindy. I don't need to read it.
So Megana has chatted. It would be great to know if there are internal software that provides an insight into what the carbon emissions or energy efficiency of the application code for developers. I feel this would be the first step towards building green software. I think that points to the SCI, right? So once we know what our emissions are, our energy footprint, then we can start applying the Carbonaware SDK.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the so the specific question was, hang on, I remember the yeah.
Hang on, I'm getting it back.
I'm trying to find it now. It was specifically about tools. So, which is a good question, because at the moment there are not that many tools out there. There are a few out there that are based on these kind of judgments.
Yeah. But I do think of the SCI as a tool. It's like a tool, like conceptual tool. But yeah, it's definitely like I think that is one of the ways that we've, and because I think one of the challenges that we have right now is the way the greenhouse gas protocol talks about scope 1, 2, and 3 isn't particularly useful from a developer's perspective. We just care about what is the energy our software is consuming, regardless of which context and who's actually using it. So I think from that perspective, it's really useful. But then you get into the problem of how do you measure energy, which is a really challenging problem. I think that there's one project that I'm very excited about in the foundation. It's currently called a Carbon QL project. To be fair, there's several services out there. There's the ones from ThoughtWorks. There's been work done by Climatic and Boa Vista and other places to kind of measure these emissions. But what the Carbon QL project is trying to do is just to make everything easier to use by giving everything the same interface, if that makes sense. So that you can then just quickly go, I've got these services. I want to calculate I want to estimate the energy of them. The foundation's got there's 10 things I can use, and actually this Green Software Foundation has created some code which is the same interface for each one, so I can just quickly pull the one that I need into it, and kind of we're trying to make it easier to do it. Because I know, Anne, you've mentioned before many times that it's all about the data, and you're absolutely right. But I will add on to that is it's all about the data, plus the fact that some data is a CSV file checked into a GitHub repository. Some data is a binary file, which you have to email somebody, and they email you. And some data is in an API, and some data is here, and some data is there. So I think one of the things that I've been realizing, we just need to get access to that data a bit easier. So I think that's some of the other tooling that we're working on.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's one thing that I will say that you have to be able to sell it within your business as well. So if it's going to take you ages to do it, if it's fundamentally misaligned with your business requirement, which is usually to go as fast as possible, or still to go as fast as possible, then you're going to have a hard time selling doing that measurement, no matter how well. It depends how good the tools are and how easy it all is, and whether it can be integrated into your IAC or GitOps or whatever your CI/CD pipeline. But if it's difficult, it's going to be difficult for you to sell. So you really need to find a way to align what you're doing with something that is a high priority business goal, which is unfortunately at the moment mostly going fast, and producing and having your developers be very productive. So you're kind of looking for tools that will do this for you and enable you to be green and go fast at the same time. So a lot of your job is as a purchaser of platforms or tools or whatever to say, I want green and fast. If you don't take it on yourself, make your suppliers do it for you, green and fast. Otherwise, and if someone's just offering fast but not offering green, then go to the person who's green and fast.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, agree. I like that. I never thought about it from as fast as possible. I like that term. I'm going to use it a lot.
Green and fast, that's the catchphrase.
Green and fast, yeah. Performance mode.
Right, exactly, yes.
Yeah.
No.
Are we still on the first insight, or have we gone to other insights?
We're on the first insight.
Yeah. We do have a question around carbon footprint of edge devices. I don't know if we probably already kind of answered that, but
I think. Yeah, I think if by edge devices you mean like mobile, like edge, like mobile and kind of other kind of edge devices, I think there are solutions out there like Climatic. I don't know if Cloud Carbon Footprint has it. I don't think so, but I believe Boa Vista might have something as well. But again, this is where we're trying to solve it in the Carbon QL project, is to kind of like, no matter what thing you have, give you an interface so you can get some data for it, or at least points to some model, or at least create a standardized interface. So if someone wants to go create a model for whatever edge device it is, they can go create it, adhere to the specification. Anybody can use it anyway.
But it's worth saying, if we're talking about consumer devices on the edge, their embodied carbon totally swamps the electrical carbon emissions associated with. So by far the best thing you can do is just make them last longer. Don't put patches live that are going to invalidate perfectly reasonable software and force people to throw away their working phones. That is the worst possible thing you can do. Worse than anything you do in a data center, anything. You can be as inefficient as you like, but do not invalidate a whole load of people's perfectly working devices.
You know, it's interesting because Google released the Chrome OS. So like now anybody can just refresh their old laptops and just install Chrome OS, and it kind of gives given laptops a whole lease of life. There's not something equivalent on the like I know you can just install the older version of an operating system, but then everything stops working. So it'd be interesting if there was maybe I don't know. I'm thinking live on a call. I shouldn't do that.
That's what panels are for.
That's what panels are for. Okay.
We're creating new projects for you.
Yeah.
So we've had an interesting comment from, and I'm sorry I mispronounced this, Sasha Danand, apologies, around AI is a major player to emit more software carbon, and I am really not getting any good solutions around green AI. Well, I thought this was a good segue to actually move on to the next insight, which is responsible AI is green AI, which is this one here. And I think, Tamara, this one was your choice, wasn't it?
It was. So actually, just to kind of also piggyback on the conversation that we're having around that relationship between hardware and software when it comes to really thinking about sort of the entire life cycle of devices and software and technologies in general. And I think looking at the environmental impact that generative AI, let's say, will have long term is really important, and especially sort of doing the kind of work that Hugging Face has done when it comes to not just looking at the carbon cost of training, but really trying to think about the entire life cycle, including manufacturing. And so, when you think about also end of life and disposal, when you sunset projects, what are all of the different kind of components in thinking about environmental impact long term? And I've been thinking a lot about the intersection of responsible AI and really thinking about the ethical implications, particularly impacts on marginalized communities, on labor practices, and the way that often does intersect with environmental concerns. And I'm about to actually start a new job as the senior researcher and project director at Data and Society's new Algorithmic Impact Methods Lab, where we'll be working on exactly this problem. And so for me, just this question of how do you really intertwine responsible AI with green AI is really of the utmost importance. And it's something that actually several people in our survey also pointed out in their comments. And so I think as generative AI grows, we will have to pay even more attention to this.
This is a very hot topic on a number of layers. And I think the key things that you've just brought out in that intro, Tamara, is the impact on labor, the wider topics, not just environment, so the social and the governance. So this responsible AI, I think, fits around the ESG topic as a whole, right? So from an energy perspective, it's massive, and we'll talk on another topic on AI shortly. But I think the impact to society wider as well is going to be quite challenging. It's interesting to see how we can solve it, right?
I definitely agree. It is. I just sighed then. I definitely agree. I think we're in. I honestly do believe we're in for a very, very challenging, number of years. There's gonna be a lot of change, a lot of change. But just bringing it back a little bit to the green AI, the energy aspects and the other aspects of AI for a second. Because I had a thought the other day. I don't know how Tamara, this might be interesting for you. I had a thought the other day, which was, the way AI is spoken about these days. It's spoken about with an assumption that how it will of an assumption to how it will be used from an efficiency perspective. And I think one of the things is like maybe AI is expensive these days, and so people are assuming they're just going to treat it with like, oh, they're barely going to use it, and they're not going to use it that much. I want to tell you a story about I used to run a meetup in London called the AI JavaScript London meetup, and there was I'm going to pronounce his name wrong. Zdenek. He's a data visualization person, consultant, and he came in one day to give a talk because he was hired by a customer, and they'd been given they had to analyze all this sound data, this 3D sound data from a football stadium. And so, they had all these speakers and everything, but the system didn't export the data in a format which their software could use. And so what he had to do is all they had was a video. And so he wrote an AI which parsed every frame of the video, used OCR, like literally read the numbers on the screen to get the data. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I was thinking, is this our future with AI? And people think we're just going to use AI responsibly, but the ease with which you can build solutions with AI, I think it speaks to something you're talking about. And I think this is my worry about AI, not just necessarily the amount it consumes energy these days, the ease with which AI gets you to market faster inefficiently means that it will be used, I believe, in a very inefficient way to get those solutions. We were at the meetup at UBS 2 weeks ago now, and somebody was speaking to me about how they were hired by a company to rework their AI solution, and it became 90% more efficient by turning it into something that's more algorithmic. But the AI solution was faster to develop, and I think this is kind of something. This is. I'm getting some early thoughts into this space, but that's my worry with AI and green AI, is that we're assuming it's going to be used minimally, but I suspect it's going to be used very poorly.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it will, and it's one of the questions that we don't cover in the Green Software Foundation, and I think it's right that we don't cover it, but maybe at some point we are going to have to cover it, which is what is the right thing to do. I mean, we tell you how to make things better and how to be more efficient, how to be more carbon aware, and all that kind of stuff, but we don't really make any comment about, actually, are you just doing something that shouldn't be done? It's not worth, it's not high enough value for it to. We make no value judgments, which I think from the community side, I think is the right thing to do. But because how do you make that value? How do you make value judgments? It's very hard.
If I may, I loved it so much. I wrote it down, which you said earlier on, and you said it's all about moving as fast as possible. And my wife is a knitwear designer, so she designs knitting, and they call themselves it's a slow fashion. Slow fashion. So do we need a slow coding? Slow down a little bit and just write it properly. Write it more efficiently.
Yeah, well, the trouble is with writing efficient code is it's generally in the past, and even now, it's really expensive. It's very, very expensive to write efficient code. It takes a lot longer. It's what I used to do 30 years ago in the olden days when computers were just so, pardon my French, shit. That you didn't have any choice but to write really highly efficient code. And so everything took ages. And as machines have got better, we've used most of that hardware improvements to just go faster. We've exchanged additional machine productivity for developer productivity, and I can't see many businesses going back on that. It's because it'll put them out of business. So we've got to find ways that they can still go fast and be green. The difficulty, as you say, that we're just giving them a tool there with AI, which is incredibly ungreen and fast. So that's the feels like that's the worst thing. We should be how do we give them a green tool that's fast? How do we put pressure on the people providing that machine learning service to make sure that it is green? And to not only make sure, but to keep improving it, and try and persuade people not to use the ones that are not green, that are fast but not green.
We go back to the same points: fast and green performance model. The running thing.
This may have to be a regulatory. I think this is just. I think we're talking about capitalism here. And getting capitalism to solve capitalism is probably not the right solution. I think this is the fundamental model that we have, is that the regulations are supposed to, what's the word I'm trying to look for? Control.
Regulate.
Regulate. Yeah. And it's supposed to be a balancing act. So I think more laws.
Well, and we have to hope that whatever regulation is put into practice is also very much informed by sort of careful research and data collection, and really considering all of the kind of downstream effects. And also, I think just thinking about this need for a really global effort on this, particularly as, through the survey, we found that, developers feel as if there are not enough resources in some languages, like Spanish, for instance. And so, if we're talking about sort of the need for regulatory change, it isn't great, maybe, if all of the kind of focus is on the global north, if all of it is sort of coming, especially from, the US and the EU, and not as much from the majority world. And so that is another thing that I think was really tricky about this.
Because one part of your research, I know we're going to go to the next insight, but part of your I thought one of the interesting ones you came up with, Tamara, was the country with the most research in green software is China, which is really and I've heard that there's a lot of work going on here in the Asia Pacific, but we're just not. I think the way the kind of the conversation's happening right now, it just isn't capturing it.
We need more translation work like that. That's one way people can get involved, maybe, is by really helping to translate resources that already exist into various languages.
Yeah. If anybody's interested, we do have community translations in the foundation. So our training has now been translated into Italian, and a number of our articles are translated into multiple languages. So if you want to get involved in that, please reach out.
Quick look, I can hear joy in the background. Yes. So I love the next insight that we're going to talk about, and it's we were talking before we came on air about, we've probably written this from the glass half empty perspective rather than the glass half full. It'd be great to hear what all of you make, and I think, Asim, you particularly wanted to talk about 63% of CEOs do not rate sustainability as a top priority.
Well, I was first asking earlier when I was actually asking if why Tamara had said 63% of CEO. I think it's an interesting question. 63, why instead of like 37? And then earlier before the call, she was like, "That's exactly what I wrote." But through all the marketing lenses that we put on it, we ripped it around to the negative, which I think is fascinating. Maybe we should get Namrata on the call and ask her why from a marketing perspective and an attention perspective it's better to talk about a negative.
If it bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads. But I thought this was a really interesting, because well, I'm going to flip it to 37%, which honestly was more than I would have expected. Was more than what I would have expected. But I also wanted to ask you, Tamara, because I think you said something interesting to me the other day, which was on stage versus off stage when people are giving feedback. So if you're a CEO on stage and you say, is it a priority for me? You're going to say yes. Or apparently 63% of you aren't, but like the rest of you, they're going to say yes. How do you say? Do you see that translating off stage in actions and other things? I mean, I know you've got something in the inside, but I'm going to punt it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that, to an extent, there is investor pressure, there is market pressure, and regulatory pressure on C-suite and leadership in general to advocate for things like sustainability. And yet, I would argue that, a lot of the real pressure internally is coming from employee-led groups and from passionate volunteers. And so, I think if you look at where resources are actually being deployed, that will kind of tell you about actual commitment on the part of, ICT leadership.
Yeah. And I would say you made me realize as you were talking, like the one, and I would say I've seen this in multiple, not many data points, but multiple organizations now, where the real transition comes when executive pay is somehow linked to sustainability. Every single organization where I see that happening, it's just overnight. Suddenly, everybody's half their job. No, that's I'm being hyperbolic, but more jobs open up. They're really interested in it. They and I wouldn't even necessarily say it's just purely from a greed perspective. I would just say you're giving them permission to execute on that front. It's a very clear signal that this isn't just something I'm saying. I really care about this. The pay is linked to it. Please go execute. Because when I always say another thing, like people think CEOs run companies, and I always think I would say the higher up you go in a company, the less power you have, and there are levers of some people you can just say whatever you want, but nothing really happens. But like, what are the real levers? And the real levers is money. Where do you? That's one of the very few levers leadership has is who are you going to award and who you're not going to award.
There was an interesting question that just came up about publicly traded companies are now disclosing or putting out their net zero targets. So was there a correlation then between the data where the 37% have got actual public statements? Is there something that we could probably do next time? Because that's probably, those companies are having to move to net zero because they've told their shareholders and regulators. So that kind of cross section would be interesting to see.
I don't believe we've got that, but what I will say is we are about to release all the data. We're just making sure it's anonymized. We just 100% want to make sure it's anonymized. We're just releasing all the data and all the questions. We should allow anybody, and it's all going to be Creative Commons and I forgot the exact license, so that anybody who wants to perform that cross correlation, like the one you just mentioned, Pindi, because I think that's actually very possible. That's actually a website called Net Zero. As you were saying, I was thinking how to do it. There's a website called Net Zero Track, which says the companies and their commitments, and then you can actually kind of compare the two together. I think maybe not. We'll be releasing the data, so maybe there'll be people who can answer that question.
Brilliant.
But I should also note that the survey of CEOs was not we did not survey CEOs specifically, right? Like we were that's a McKinsey study, I believe, that was sort of part of that insight. In fact, most of the people who were responding to our survey, I mean, we did reach some people in leadership positions for sure. But it was, your, as I would say, your rank and file kind of developers, it was people who are kind of practitioners on a day-to-day level, who were kind of talking about how they felt supported or not by leadership, which is an interesting part of sort of the cultural side of green software. But I think it would be really interesting to kind of dig deeper into that kind of juxtaposition between net zero and other sort of public climate pledges and what CEOs say privately is actually their priority or not, because is the funding there? Are the resources there? Are people on sustainability teams being laid off? This is the question. So
and there's a question that's just come in that asks, do you think leaders are even aware that there is a CO2 footprint of software? You know, do we think it is just about basic awareness that you know, they may think about the carbon impact of their buildings or their factories or their supply chain, but not their software?
There is an insight that answers that.
Go and check the website, folks.
What's
the link again?
Digital, I think we should speak to it. Digital does not equal green. Is that the one, Tamara, you would say answers that? Yeah. Oh no, am I reading the? I think I read a different question.
No, I think that is the one. That
That's
is.
the one. Yeah.
I mean, it's not exactly the same, but I think it's trying to say the same thing, isn't it? That that there's this assumption that, you know, software, it's this far away thing. You don't, especially, you know, in the cloud, you don't see the data center. So, oh, it doesn't exist because I don't control it anymore. And it's about thinking about the scope of your emissions, of course.
Yeah. Oh, I want to. Oh, sorry, the leader's question. I actually was interested because because I work inside organizations that are very software focused. For me, it kind of probably does come up more in conversations. I don't know if, Pindy, I'm putting you on the spot here right now, but as somebody who works where the technology is an supporter of the main business use case, I mean, in your experience, how much is it in the minds of leaders? Yeah.
So as we're publicly traded, it's we are disclosing our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So it is at the forefront of our senior leadership teams. So the question that was raised earlier about, are leaders aware that software creates emissions? I think in our organization, yes, because they know that, you know, we are consuming power from our data centers and from our cloud hyperscaler as well. So they are aware that it's intrinsically linked, right? Technology and software. In terms of the organization, there is a big movement internally, grassroots level, all the way through to the senior leadership team. So I think we're, you know, in a good space, and that's a collective effort from our leadership who, you know, sustainability is part of their objectives, as well as our software, you know, teams, our infrastructure teams that all know that, you know, we want to become more environmentally friendly. We want to get to our net zero targets. And I think it really resonates on people's personal passions as well. You know, climate and environment is not a workplace thing. It affects all of us inside and outside. So I think that's where the connection becomes more powerful, because people understand that whatever they're doing at work and at home is going to have an impact long term. So yeah.
Excellent. And I would imagine that your work and the work of the the Green Guild inside UBS has probably been quite instrumental in making sure that the leadership is aware of this work. Yeah.
Definitely.
Amazing. So we are starting to run out of time, and I wanted to give Pindy time to talk about her favourite insight, which is about decarbonisation alone can't make software green. So Pindy, what are your thoughts on this one?
So it's the UN World Environment Day, and environment is everything, right? So we have focused quite a lot on energy, rightly so, in carbon. But this one resonates with me because it also talks about the broader issue of water consumption. So we know that our data centers take in water for cooling, and we measure data center efficiency through various ratios in the industry. But this one's interesting because it now starts to look at AI, and we're going back to AI again, as it is a hot topic. But 2 universities, the University of California and Texas, they led a research program to understand the water footprint of AI. and what that means to the AI algorithms when they're run. And I love this outcome that they state. They said that basically, if you train a GPT-3 model in a data center, it roughly consumes 700,000 liters of clean water. So huge amounts. Now, especially when you start thinking about this in countries where there's droughts. So I think this now starts to broaden that whole energy and carbon into the other areas of the environment. And I think this is going to be one that's going to be very interesting to monitor. So what are your thoughts? Do we need a water footprint SCI?
Well, I think there's another. I don't know. I can't remember if it's in our insight, but there's also another one, which is one typical conversation with, and I don't know if it's 3 or 4 or 5. One conversation is about 500 milliliter, like a small bottle of water. That's one conversation, and I felt what I felt about this particular insight was that for some reason, and I haven't quite figured out what's going on in my head, it feels more personal. It feels more personal. It feels more impactful. Energy can be quite abstract. It is kind of like you're told it's bad, but this is like if you're on a water-stressed region and you're turning the tap on, you're getting a brown, and then you're hearing about some GPT which is sucking all your water. It's very personal, and we need clean drinking water. It's a health benefit. It's a human benefit. Yeah.
And it kind of feels like it's crazy because the nice thing about training AI is it's totally latency insensitive. You can do it anywhere you want using, it could be, it's your perfect workload for something that's generated close to a wind farm, or for example, even at sea. Even one of Azure had a big thing about undersea data centers for a while, which I think actually did work quite well. They found that was quite a positive thing. You could be generating models close to the energy. It's crazy, and yet I suspect it will be the case. People will be training models in data centers where it's entirely fossil fueled, and they're using a whole load of clean water that people will be drinking, when that's not required. It is an latency insensitive workload. It should be utterly, no one should even think about training it somewhere where you're using it, that drawing power from a dirty grid, and you're using drinking water. It's terrible. I bet they are. Pindy, I strongly suspect you're right. They will be, but they shouldn't be. There's no need to. It's practically immoral. Isn't it really? Well, it is immoral.
And you've just pointed out a great regulation that needs to come in place, right? That if you're training, it needs to be in these types of data centers. I mean, it's quite fundamental when you look at the research, the impact of these models. And we're talking about AI again, but I suppose it applies to any software, right? But AI was part of this research paper.
Well, and somebody in the comments just talked about the new attempt to regulate construction in Arizona because of water concerns. And so I think just pointing to the fact that this is really something that does require regulation very quickly.
Yeah.
And, tech really is not being regulated in the same way as other sectors. And so, yeah.
I suppose also because water is very low. Sorry.
I say the trouble is we've got too much money. It's hard for us it's hard for people to put pressure on us to behave by just charging more because we've got too much money.
Yeah. But also interestingly I was thinking about water. Water is very localized, isn't it? And you can't, like electricity, you can transmit over long distances and it's easy. But water, you can't just suddenly pump it. Oh no, it's not easy. But you can't like pump. It's not a lot easier than pumping water in a different area. So I suppose if a region is water stressed, it's quite a problem. It's very hard to resolve. And so you're right. That is an area. And this is, I think, an area that we're. I was proposing this idea of water aware. There's carbon and water aware computing. There was also, and I haven't read the paper yet fully. It might be mentioned here as well, but somebody was mentioning on having a conversation on LinkedIn, and there was an idea that actually it might be orthogonal to the signal to shift from a carbon perspective might be different to the signal to shift from a water perspective.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And it actually might be the opposite signal. So if you optimize for carbon, you might be moving to an area with the most water stress. So it actually turns into a much more complicated surface of optimization trade-offs that you need to think about, which is interesting. It just shows this field is a field that's very complicated.
Yeah, I mean, my dream would be that all AI training models were trained in data centers in Greenland, which don't actually exist at the moment. But Greenland has limitless green power, which is the water runoff from the melting glaciers. You know, silver lining to every cloud. And usually they just smelt aluminium with it. But we could be running data centers. We could be doing. We could be training AI models that are not latency sensitive. You can do that whenever you like. So
they should rename it to AI Land. I bet if they renamed it to AI Land, everybody would just
buy it.
Are we almost? Yeah.
We are, and do you know what? There's been so many questions, and I feel really bad for all the folks that have asked these questions that we haven't been able to answer. But what we are going to do, and I've been talking to our wonderful marketing and PR lead, Namrata, we are going to write all of those up into a blog post and publish those. And who knows, we might even do another one of these and come back on some of those questions, because there's been some really wonderful things that have, really, I don't think we've even solved all the problems yet. It's certainly given us ideas for new standards, new articles, new insights in the future. But yes, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone on the panel for sharing their insights, sharing the time, answering all the different questions that we've had. And we do have some little calls to action as well. We didn't want to leave you without getting you to sign up for a few little things. There's my question slide. Let's keep going. So you may be aware, if you are attending this live, that we have community meetups, and we actually have 28 groups around the world, including the global group, which we use for online events. And there's some pictures here from our recent London meetup where we celebrated the 2nd anniversary of the Green Software Foundation. And we are looking to grow around the world. So if you don't have a group in your area or your group's not active, then we'd love to hear from you as well. And Anne, I think you've got your hand up there.
I ask, because one thing you don't have on there that would I think is very good for folk who are listening into this is that there's an excellent podcast from the Green Software Foundation called Environment Variables that is a very well done podcast and very much worth you listening to if you can't make it to an in-person meetup.
Hey, there you go. You did it for me. I don't even need to talk through that slide.
Oh, you're right. Sorry.
Sorry,
I don't mind. I usurped your slide.
And Anne is a regular contributor to that podcast, and that is weekly as well. So please do sign up for the Environment Variables podcast. It is on every platform that we could fit it on. We have a course and lots of learning materials for green software practitioners. And there's lots of different content on there. So wherever you are in your journey, please do check out our learning materials, including the formal course, which is run through the Linux Foundation. And we have a newsletter as well. And that is also weekly. We have so much interesting activity going on right now. So if you'd like to see some insights every Friday in your inbox, please sign up. Just go to the greensoftware.foundation website. And that's it. That's the last slide. So I think that is it for now. And yes, again, huge thanks to all of you. And I also just want to say particular thanks to Tamara for all of your work on the on the state of green software. Congratulations on the new job as well. And thank you to Anne and Pindi and Asim for giving up your time as well, and to all of our guests on the live chat as well. We'll collect up all those questions and sign up to the newsletter, and then we'll send you the blog post where we answer all those questions finally.
And I also want to thank Adam for a very well structured and planned and executed event, and also Namrata for all of your work as well. So I know you're not on the screen, but you've been working extremely hard in there as well. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.